Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Blockchain Radicals: How Capitalism Ruined Crypto and How to Fix It, by Josh Dávila. Narrated by Jonathan Todd Ross. Disclaimer. The purpose of this book is to provide educational information and encourage thought and discussion on the political applications of blockchain technology and cryptocurrency. It is not intended as a guide for financial gain or investment advice. The projects mentioned in the book serve as a mix of examples, highlighting both the challenges and potential benefits of crypto through a radical political lens. It is important to note that the information contained in this book is based on the best available data at the time of writing, and the crypto industry is rapidly evolving. As such, some of the projects mentioned in the book may no longer exist or may have changed significantly by the time the book is heard. Listeners should approach this book with an open mind and critically evaluate the information contained within. It is not intended as financial advice, and listeners are encouraged to seek professional guidance before making any investment decisions. Introduction. Forging a new map of the crypto territory. Writing has nothing to do with meaning. It has to do with land surveying and cartography, including the mapping of countries yet to come. Gilles Deleuze. In early 2022, truckers protested against vaccine mandates for crossing the U.S. border in Ottawa, the capital of Canada. This Freedom Convoy campaign later became a protest against general COVID-19 restrictions, in response to several crowdfunding campaigns that raised millions of dollars from Canadians and, problematically, Americans associated with far-right political groups. Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau invoked the 1988 Emergencies Act for 10 days. This declared that the government could freeze the bank and payment service provider accounts of individuals suspected of being part of the convoy without needing to go through the court system. This also included platforms that used cryptocurrencies and led to a decree by the Canadian government that specific cryptocurrency firms had to give information about any assets being used in the campaign. A month or so later, a week into the Russian invasion of Ukraine, long-term Putin foe Pussy Riot singer Nadia Tolokonnikova started a blockchain-enabled DAO, decentralized autonomous organization, and used the much-derided medium of NFTs to raise money for the Ukrainian resistance, announcing on Twitter that blockchain was an important part of the fight against dictators. In Kyiv, meanwhile, the besieged government also made public several cryptocurrency wallets that supporters could donate to. By the end of February 2022, they had raised over $60 million in Bitcoin, Ether, and other cryptocurrencies, spending the funds on fuel, food, and other supplies, like bulletproof vests and night vision goggles for soldiers. Alex Bornyakov, the Deputy Minister of the Ministry of Digital Transformation, which facilitated the spending of the cryptocurrency, stated that cryptocurrency is easier, not complicated, transparent, and faster in comparison to a SWIFT transaction, which could take more than a day. Suddenly, crypto, once a shorthand for cryptography, and now also for cryptocurrencies, was, for the first time since Occupy Wall Street and the financial blockade of WikiLeaks, occupying center stage in a political and economic crisis. However, while these developments are headline-grabbing and not unambiguously politically progressive, it is also important not to overlook the myriad ways in which cryptocurrency is also being used by others experiencing state repression. For example, in Palestine and elsewhere in countries with economic sanctions, or by sex workers who are constantly in a fight against financial service providers due to the legal gray area in which they work. For many who don't have the privilege of proper financial services, turning to cryptocurrency has been one of their lifelines. Why then has blockchain been greeted with such hostility and skepticism by much of the left? One of the earliest critiques of Bitcoin, the first and most famous of the cryptocurrencies, was David Columbia's The Politics of Bitcoin, Software as Right-Wing Extremism. His argument was largely that Bitcoin's right libertarian origins meant it was predisposed to having utility and application only for a right-wing agenda, if any at all. This has continued with left-wing publications like Jacobin, which in 2022 published several articles related to crypto, with nearly all of them concluding that cryptocurrency is a scam, a Ponzi scheme, and something that the left should stay away from. A look through many of the claims made and the sources cited in these articles show that few of the writers properly understood many of the basic technical principles and workings of the technology, making their claims weak for people who are actually working on the infrastructure they are critiquing. It seems that their audience is not those who are closest to being able to answer their critiques. That is, people working in the industry, but instead others who are jockeying for position within what might be termed the critique economy, a largely discursive and academic mini-industry that seems to have consumed too much of the left's energy of late, as its actual institutional power has declined. Blockchain is not a simple technology, so while technical inaccuracies can be forgiven, what is disturbing about the many articles written by incorrect but otherwise intelligent journalists and academics is how their claims inadvertently serve the crypto industry. By taking the socio-political descriptions of what cryptocurrencies or blockchains are at face value, these critics are inadvertently doing the job of the crypto marketers and hype men they so despise. At the same time, they also try to enshrine themselves as gatekeepers of what constitutes appropriate left-wing endeavors and resources. The truth is that crypto marketers use right-wing libertarian rhetoric in order to attract a particular audience. Whether or not either would describe themselves as libertarian is beside the point, because it is also one that is willing to part with their government-backed money. This is not meant to disparage that audience. The marketing is designed to tap into the disillusion and sense of disenfranchisement that many people feel, and especially the idea that there is something wrong with the monetary system. This is twisted into the adoption of a right-wing politics that has gained some popularity and become very profitable for some. In the past decade or two, there has been a process of implicit and explicit association that has led many to believe that anything crypto-related is right-wing and libertarian, an attitude adopted and promoted by many of its figureheads. What the left-wing critique economy has failed to grasp, however, is that this has all been intentional as a way to keep the left out of the sphere of influence, limiting its capacity to decide on the direction that this new technological space should take. It was a poisoning of the well that the gatekeepers, writing scathing pieces as part of the critique economy, have continued to add yet more poison to. They have inadvertently reinforced the legitimacy of an incorrect framework created by the crypto industry, and thus provided a poor map for helping others on the left navigate this space. Responses to crypto tend to be either excessively boosterish or completely skeptical. But this book instead argues that blockchains can both support existing political strategies on the left and open up new ones, novel strategies that blockchains made visible, legible, or possible. A typical writer of the critique economy attacks techno-determinism, the idea that progress in technology is the key to society's development as well as its cultural values, making it the main agent of societal change. Optimistic techno-determinism is usually what is called upon by Silicon Valley elites to justify pushing more and more technological solutions, with the presumptions that improving technology helps progress society and therefore leads to more progressive outcomes. Sometimes this is referred to as techno-utopianism, or the Californian ideology, a term coined in an essay by Richard Barbrook and Andy Cameron that claims its origins can be traced to the philosophy of the right libertarian author Ayn Rand. Pessimistic techno-determinism as a counterclaim has emerged largely on the left after promises about technology leading us to more fulfilled and prosperous lives have repeatedly failed. This can more broadly be characterized as the feeling that most, if not all, new technology that has come about can only be used in ways that are exploitative or against your goals if you're on the left of the political spectrum. This book is not techno-deterministic in either direction, and is instead meant to recognize the positives and the negatives of this emerging technology, an approach needed in order to make important assessments as to what this technology will feasibly allow us to do that will be beneficial to society as a whole, and not just those that control the means of technological innovation. Instead of viewing technology as deterministic, we can see it as probabilistic, recognizing that the current situation we're in significantly favors the haves over the have-nots, but also understanding that it doesn't have to be this way. The left has an opportunity to alter the status quo, perhaps with the very technology supporting it. The advancement of new technology is not the only agent for political change, but we cannot separate it away neatly from our social relations, especially in a world where so many of these social relations are mediated by the advanced and complex infrastructure that makes up the Internet. Ultimately, social movements are what lead to political change. But technology has always been important for movements. Without the printing press, many important ideas would never have been spread. The advance of technology creates the material conditions for what is possible, but it's important for people seeking social justice to recognize their own agency in influencing what is done with it. How much agency is recognized and how it is used is what tips the scales for or against the public benefit. I would name this position and framework as techno-probabilism. Techno-probabilism is a framework for thinking critically about the potential futures enabled by a particular technology, given certain conditions and uncertainties. It avoids both optimistic and pessimistic techno-determinism by attempting to recognize the full spectrum of practical possibility. It is a way of thinking about technology that is more open-ended and exploratory. It allows for space to think about the potential conditions that would need to be had in order to steer us towards particular futures. It understands that the same technology built with the intention to be used in one application or one political ideology is often not loyal to its creators and can be used for multiple other situations. This is especially the case for cryptocurrency and blockchains, as will be covered throughout the book. By applying a progressive political view to this framework on the technological space inhabited by blockchain and cryptocurrencies, we can begin to develop a strategy that recognizes the potential of technology to enable collective action, while also taking into account the political conditions and risks that accompany technological development. It is a strategic framework that gives us permission to reappropriate technology developed with capital in mind to sustain collective liberation, while also being aware of the need for strategic duplicity in order to navigate the contradictions of a globalized, technologized political economy. New technology has always been a political consideration, from new smithing techniques for creating stronger metals for swords, to companies implementing systems that make half their workforce redundant, to state-issued identity cards. There is a growing likelihood that cryptocurrencies and blockchains will creep into the mainstream. Whether or not the values of cryptocurrencies ever reach the unrealistically high levels their hypemen predict on social media. If that's the case, it's important to have an appropriate map of the territory in order to create strategies and tactics that heighten the probability for desired outcomes. This book will demonstrate that crypto and blockchain have played a much more complex role in attacking and circumventing traditional power structures in ways which are amenable to a number of ostensibly contradictory political projects. While much of the focus on it since then has been from either boosters or skeptics, its emergent qualities and the ways in which people have been actively engaging with it in ways that would be interesting for the left is largely the focus of this book. The left skeptics around crypto and blockchain have been by far the most vocal and strident voices, often drowning out more tentative and exploratory practitioners, artists, activists, and programmers. I am not claiming that blockchain is a panacea, but the insistence that you need not investigate it yourself because the relevant academics have already done that for you and have decided it is fruitless is another part of the set of presumptions this book hopes to work against. Based on my experience of working in this space in various capacities, and talking to precisely those artists, activists, and programmers working within the blockchain space who are committed to an egalitarian politics, we need to have a fuller and clearer understanding of the strengths and limitations of blockchain. I would argue it is precisely blockchain's emergent properties, its newness and plasticity, and the ways it might be imaginatively developed, that is what makes it both exciting and troubling to many. Of course, nothing that develops out of and under capitalism is going to avoid hucksterism, scams, volatility, exploitation, and straight criminality. Unfortunately, there is no space in which the revolution can be organized, only a set of conditions of no one's choosing that have to be grappled with. While there were constructive reactions to the rise of the Internet, like 1990s cyberfeminism and the left blogosphere around Mark Fisher's K-Punk, the larger left does not have the time to make the same mistakes it made with the Internet and again with social media, by ignoring it until a crisis like the 2008 recession occurs. When just a couple of decades ago left-wing institutions and groups were deriding the Internet as just another bourgeois distraction, today social media is undoubtedly essential for organizing and collective action, yet relies on centralized platforms owned by some of the most powerful tech companies in the world. While there were groups on the left fighting over the political terrain of early cyberspace, their successes were limited. The left needs to be engaged in building its own technological infrastructure if it wants to stay resilient in the future. The blockchain space is fraught with all kinds of questionable practices, a messy, complicated, and developing territory pulling in numerous directions. The questionable or even outright illegality that is associated with cryptocurrency can be particularly deeply off-putting to many, especially left-liberal commentators, who have trust in dominant institutions and want a measured and measurable progress within well-defined and narrow parameters. But it is from the potentially disturbing foment of the blockchain space, I would argue, that the new is likely to emerge, partly because now that the more conventional electoral and parliamentary models of the attempt to push toward socialism have been thwarted, Sanders in the US and Corbyn in the UK, to give the two most pertinent examples for Anglophone listeners, so the energy that animated those concerns will flow elsewhere. Into other, more militant forms of worker organizing, no doubt, but also, given the centrality of online life in the 21st century, into digital networks that are attempting to create more equitable and open forms of mutualism, sociality, and interrelation. What's certain is that the impulses towards socialism, communism, economic democracy, call it what you will, develop in lockstep with capital, wrestling it all the way. At the moment, blockchain is a new frontier, and it's there that we must also contest territory, rather than merely cede it, as always already belonging to the right. The map is not the territory. In the 1930s, the Polish-American scientist and philosopher Alfred Korzybski made the remark, "The map is not the territory," or that abstraction derived from a thing is different from the thing itself. His view was that many people confuse conceptual models of reality with reality. For example, the map of Peru's geography is still very different from the actual geography of Peru. The symbols used on the map to denote where the Andes Mountains are helpful in limited ways, unless the map zooms in closer and contains more details. But even then, it will differ from actually being in the Andes. This is not to say that conceptual models are useless, but that they need to be paired with critical thinking because, as another aphorism goes, all models are wrong, but some are useful. While these observations are more common to academic circles for semantics, linguistics, or statistics, among other fields, they are also important for understanding politics, including the politics of technology. Gilles Deleuze was a French post-Marxist philosopher born in 1925, who witnessed the civil unrest throughout France in May 1968 that saw the largest general strike ever attempted in the country's history, as decentralized wildcat strikes popped up in support of ongoing protests against capitalism, consumerism, and imperialism. While there were significant gains made by workers once the Gaullist government realized that increased police violence was making the situation worse, the call for revolution was made by socialists and communists didn't succeed. No Western country had come so close to a political revolution in the past several decades. In the midst of this event, Deleuze published his magnum opus, Difference and Repetition, a critique of representational thinking which would then heavily influence his two most popular books, co-written with Félix Guattari, Anti-Oedipus and 1,000 Plateaus. Deleuze's work is notoriously difficult to understand, but has been a significant influence on me in trying to better understand crypto while writing this book. The most fundamental part of his critique of representational thinking, or what is also commonly referred to as skeuomorphic thinking by others, is the framework I use for the structure of this book. To understand Deleuze's critique of representational thinking, we can turn to a video made by the popular YouTube video essayist Jonas Cheka. To explain Deleuze's critique of representational thinking, Cheka uses the example of the drum machine. The drum machine was originally created as a tool for musicians to use in a situation where they may not have a drummer for their musical ensemble. From the viewpoint of representational thinking, the drum machine is simply a lesser version of a drummer with a real drum set, a representation that does not match the ideal. Representational thinking is thus arborescent, or similar to a tree, with branches, representations, stemming from the base, the ideal drummer and drum set. This type of thinking, however, is extremely limiting for understanding the drum machine and does not map well onto the ways in which drum machines have actually been deployed. Instead of limiting the drum machine to this representation, musicians ended up pushing the drum machine to do things that a drummer with a drum set could never do, thus starting the creation of new genres of music. This new box of repeated synthetic sounds became the basis of not just the Cambrian explosion of electronic music genres, but is now used to complement already existing genres of music. These first experimental musicians were thus not limiting themselves because they were not asking what the drum machine represents, but instead asking what can the drum machine do. Deleuze calls this a form of rhizomatic thinking. You can think of a rhizome as a network that lacks a clear center, and it is by thinking rhizomatically that we are able to understand the possibilities in present that allow for the creation of the new, uninhibited by representations. For Deleuze, many people are trapped in representational ways of thinking that are limiting their understanding of the world. These representations can also be seen as tracings or stickers that we tried to put on top of the world to make it easier to understand, even if they are ultimately incorrect. My argument in this book is that representational thinking is also rampant in the crypto industry as a way to market crypto to a large audience quickly, as well as in the minds of the critics of crypto. Discussions and debates between hype men and gatekeepers of crypto tend to happen over a map which is covered in tracings derived from representational thinking, creating unresolvable tensions because neither are talking about the actual territory. This is obviously problematic if the left wants to be able to respond to the changes being brought on by the introduction of crypto and blockchains. The left cannot be using an incorrect map or a conceptual model to derive a response. The left must also be cognizant that whatever model or mapping is created will be wrong or limited to some extent. The point is to try to make one which is at least useful. The book therefore asks listeners to not ask what crypto represents, but instead ask what can crypto do, without too much concern for the current map of the territory they may have in their head. The purpose of this book is to provide a more useful map of the crypto territory to help you and the social movement you may be a part of to navigate it safely. By understanding the way past social movements from the right and the left have influenced the trajectory of crypto, and by making new connections that are not made in mainstream discourse as it exists at the time of writing, a new map can be drawn to lead us into new futures. One that is neither overly optimistic and utopian about a future with crypto, nor deterministically pessimistic. Another important consideration to keep in mind is that the map drawn in this book is just a snapshot of a particular moment in time in a space that is rapidly evolving. The projects mentioned in this book should not be considered an endorsement or financial advice. I am not a good person to listen to for that, and are all likely to be different or bankrupt to varying degrees by the time you listen to this book. They should only be seen as examples for helping us draw a more useful and rhizomatic map. Collective emergence. Using Deleuze's framework for his critique of representational thinking, I go through various different common representational models used by crypto hypemen and describe why they are wrong, but also why just because they are wrong does not mean that crypto is useless for the left, as many of its critics would have you believe. This book is separated into 3 sections that move from the worst to least bad form of representational thinking common in the crypto world. In the first section, we will explore the idea of crypto as money, which was the original idea that propelled Bitcoin into existence. Taking a critical analysis of these claims, it is not hard to see that Bitcoin, and cryptocurrency generally, is not money. However, the fact that it is not money can be a good thing, especially for its radical political potential. It is this very fact, along with the many properties that cryptocurrencies share with money, that allows cryptocurrency to be used for circumventing financial blockades by states or banks in various contexts through counter-trade, as has been the case for WikiLeaks and Sci-Hub, among others. The flexibility of the system also allows us to explore alternative democratic monetary systems that would otherwise not be possible, and that defy the digital metal narratives expounded by right-wing libertarian hype men. In the second section, we explore the next most common representation, which is crypto as finance. Starting with a dive into Ethereum and its innovative creation of smart contracts, we see how this attempt at cryptographically enforced contracts written in computer code do not actually prove the common dictum from the crypto hype men that code is law. The affordances of smart contracts are, however, important for the functioning of the very quickly growing decentralized finance, DeFi, space, in which many financial products that would normally only be available to those on Wall Street are available to anyone through a blockchain. While much of this space is a reformulation of many of the most capitalistic financial products, representational thinking can limit our abilities to look into the details of these mechanisms and discover the potentials of smart contracts and crypto tokens. The differences between the traditional financial system and DeFi are important to understand for developing strategies that subvert financial systems for different ends than profit. We will also cover the phenomena of non-fungible tokens, NFTs, and how, similar to many DeFi mechanisms, they are commonly misunderstood and can be repurposed for more collective ends. The third section will take a critical look at the least worst representational model used to understand this space.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?